guys, I'm going to do another history movie review this evening, and this one's I've pretty much queued up for a long time, and wanted to re-watch it before I did another movie review, especially of this one. And this one is going to be on the 2019 movie The King, which is on Netflix. Netflix produced, and it is still on there at the moment as far as I last checked. Brilliant movie, particularly with a new up and coming star, which is Timothee Chalemet, playing King Henry V, or King Harry, or Hal as he's called in the movie as well. So just before I get into it, I'll give you a quick summary about what the movie is about. So, for those of you who did Shakespeare in school, this is effectively a 2 hour and 20 condensed version of Henry IV Part 1 and 2, and Henry V. I might have got that one wrong, maybe Henry V Part 1 and 2 as well. But either way, they are condensed down into this movie. And the movie opens up with England at the time of the 1400s, early 1400s. You have a domestic rebellion called Hotspurs Rebellion. So they are rebelling against Henry's father, Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke as he's known as. So this man came to the throne. He effectively in history has usurped the throne from Richard. I think it's Richard II was the rightful King of England, and Henry Bolingbroke had effectively staged a coup and taken the throne of England, and the become King of England himself. So his son, he's got a bit of a wayward son, who is referred to as Hal or Harry. And in the movie we're introduced to Harry, played by Timothee Chalamet. He is, you sort of, I don't want to listen to any authority, particularly my dad. I don't like my dad, particularly his regime and the way that he is. He's dying. Henry IV is dying at the time. And he, early on in the movie, we are told that it is not going to be primogeniture, which is the firstborn son, who will become King of England, but Henry IV plans to make his son Thomas, the second-born son, King of England. And as far as Henry's concerned, he doesn't really care. He doesn't want anything to do with it. And he enjoys, going down to the tavern with his friend Falstaff, played by Joel Edgerton, who also wrote the movie as well, which I was quite impressed with. He's a brilliant actor. He's been in many things, and I can't believe he wrote the movie, and it's such a well written script as well, quite engaging as well. And so we see Harry or Hal, the prince of, effectively the Prince of Wales, which is will become Henry V with Falstaff, and we see that there is a rebellion going on, where Hotspurs Rebellion, and they meet the royal army, in which young Percy Hotspur challenges Thomas, the brother of Hal, to a one-on-one fight, rather than allowing all the troops to be massacred and to cost hundreds of lives on the battlefield. One-on-one, and we'll settle this right, now and for all. And instead, Hal or Harry turns up and says, "No, I will not allow you to fight and die. I'm going to fight," because he's quite sort of, I don't say anarchistic, but he's quite nihilistic at this point. I think that is the prince, and he decides to fight Percy Hotspur. As much as there is an element that he hates his father, he's not about to allow anybody to besmirch his family name, and not allow his brother Thomas to be put into the way of harm. And if he can avoid that, he will. So he does. He takes the opportunity to fight Percy Hotspur one-on-one, and he kills him. And this is where we start to see the sort of the the ruthlessness and the hard streak running through Harry and Hal. We at this time in England, we have the sort of uncertainty of the Bolingbroke regime as it is at the time of Henry IV. You have the Hotspur Rebellion in England. At the same time, you have Owain Glyndwr's war for Welsh independence at the same time. That is co-sponsored the Welsh independence, war for Welsh independence, by the French, and they are also assisted by Castilian, who, aka the Spanish, by the House of Castile, and we don't really get to see an awful lot about Owain Glyndwr, but it is referenced in the movie about the uprisings in the domestic kingdom, as well as, you know, accepting the fact that Scotland is its own independent nation that had fought at Bannockburn and won its independence as well a century earlier. So we see Henry IV dies. It's not a sweet ceremony of coming together on the deathbed between Hal and his father. He reluctantly assumes the throne and King of England to become Henry V. His brother, it has been explained, Thomas, had been killed in Wales. I don't believe that this is true historically, but for the sake of the movie, that's what they say. And in the movie, then we see that as part of Henry's new regime, that we see that there's a lot of diplomacy from other areas of Europe, wishing him well, congratulations on assuming the throne, and we see that the gift sent by the King of France, or I should say the Dauphin of France, played by Robert Pattinson, is a ball, and just a tennis ball, and the insinuation by that Henry takes it is that the ball signifies that he is a child playing a game, and that they've given him a ball to keep him, you know, effectively to show him what they think of him, that he's a child, and he's begrudged by this massively, Henry. Not only is he begrudged by this, but there is domestic problems where two of his lords, I think it's Grey and Cambridge, are approached by by Frenchmen to whisper a word in the ear of King Henry or to Henry's advisors in order to, in so much as I don't know whether to overthrow King Henry as such a new king and put on the throne somebody more favourable to the French king, which is Charles VI, or aka Charles the Mad, who was not really in control of his kingdom at the time, who would have sporadic moments of lucidness and then madness. He was himself in France at the time. They were bitterly quarrelling with a domestic civil war between the houses of Orleans, who were the cadet family to the royal family in France. You had the Burgundian family. I think it's led by Charles the Bold, and the other family then, the Armagnac, who effectively are the ruling Valois Orleans family of France, are warring over the succession to Charles the Mad. And at this point, so you've got a massive strife in France. You've got the Burgundians here in Belgium and in Lorraine in the west of France. They are kicking up a fuss. You have the Armagnacs in the main body of France, what we know today, effectively saying no, we're all stable, everything's fine, you just need to toe into line, let's just do away with this civil strife. But at the same time, they've instigated and they've aggravated the King of England, who by his own um, rightful claim, King Henry, that he decides to throw his hat into the ring to say, I would like to be considered as the heir of the King of France, as well as marry the daughter, Catherine Valois, the princess of daughter princess of Charles. And the French pretty much say no to this in real life. They say no, you're not marrying, because they know what that means, that the kingdoms of France and England would be one, and effectively be under the control of the King of England, Henry V. So no, they said no. In reality, this is what instigated the war, the relaunching of the Hundred Years' War, the period of 1415 onwards, all the way until Joan of Arc comes about. So in the movie we have full staff. Joel Edgerton's character is given full command of the army. He's the only person that Hal can trust, because he's executed Cambridge and Grey for conspiring with the French in order to either overthrow his kingdom or to effectively make him more pro-France. You have the advisor, who's a very slippery character in this movie, called Sir William Gascoigne, and he's played by Sean Harris, the ginger guy with a really raspy voice. He's been in loads of movies, like he's been in the Mission Impossible movies, Harry Brown, he's been in Prometheus. Brilliant actor, very, very suited to this time period as well. But he's more or less like the King's main advisor, Sir William Gascoigne. And with the sort of the approval and the pushing of the church in England, and also through the English nobility, Henry launches an invasion of France in 1415 of around 11,000 men, mainly men with longbowmen, Welsh and English longbowmen. They invaded Normandy, which is northern France, and immediately they set about putting Harfleur under siege. Now you can see this also. There's another movie called Henry V with Kenneth Branagh that they show this too. I think Henry V is more sort of loyal to the actual Shakespearean dialogue in the play, whereas this movie is a reinterpretation of that with the same events made for a modern audience. Which, either way, I think both movies are superb, but this one is brilliant. So the siege at Harfleur takes a little bit longer than what Henry anticipates, and after around 6 months, the town does finally surrender to Henry. But what had happened at this point is that crucial time that Henry was laying siege to different towns in northern France, was that it was time for the French nobility to get their shit together and confront Henry on French soil and defeat him, and really hammer home what they thought of him. And Henry is really in dire straits early on in the campaign. So even though that they have taken command of many towns in northern France, his army is limping desperately to try and get to Calais, which is the port. It's English controlled port in northern France, and they are intercepted there before they get there by the main French army, and at this time the main French army were considerably bigger than the English army, at least 3 times bigger, if I'm understood rightly. And they face off at a battlefield by the name of Agincourt. So at this point, just to stop there, we are introduced to other characters in the film. So Robert Pattinson's Dauphin is unbelievably good. I thought he was quite creepy. The character of the Dauphin, which is, I believe, is Charles, I think it's Charles the Spider, they called him later on. He effectively would be the king who would later on reconquer all of France, save for Calais and Dunkirk for France. So, spoiler, the French do win the 100 Years' War. But after he relied on the inspiration of Joan of Arc in order to, put some lead into his pencil of his flailing army in the 1420s. Anyways, Robert Pattinson's sort of flamboyant, over the top, arrogant, lewd character is in a massive contrast to Prince Hal and Harry, who's very put across Timothee Chalamet as a really sort of stoic, Spartan, penitent king who, no frills whatsoever, who, is very, very much, going there to claim what he thinks is, claim some restitution from being insulted, and also taking what he thinks is rightfully his, which is to become King of France. And you can say Falstaff is the main commander. We see at this point now that Falstaff has a plan which he thinks can win victory at Agincourt, despite the overwhelming superiority of the French at this time. Effectively, the French were mounted knights at this point in their history. I mean, in terms of the history of battle on the European continent at this time, as is seen in the Italian wars later on, and in the 1300s domestically in Europe, the mounted knight and the ability to have mounted riders was paramount to winning battlefield supremacy, whereas the English for a number of years had been using their split of majority longbowmen missile soldiers. The army would be comprised primarily of 2/3 longbowmen and 1/3 either mounted or dismounted knights. So knights in armor, on the battlefield, hand-to-hand combat fighting. And the French were very, very much the opposite of this. The majority of their army were mounted knights or dismounted knights, and they opted, instead of the longbow, their primary missile weapon was the crossbow, which, in terms of battlefield application, was not as successful as the longbow. The crossbow is more of a garrison weapon, whereby if you are holding a particular castle, if you're holding a particular town, then yes, the longbow would probably be the priority weapon to, quick reload, short range of fire, rapid rates of fire. Whereas if you are on a flat plain and you are on an actual battlefield, the longbow would have to be a lot closer to the actual fighting itself, rather than the longbow, which can be many meters away. And as we see in the 100 Years' War, and as the French do learn decade after decade of the 100 Years' War with the longbow, is that crucial gap between where you are lined up and receiving fire from the longbow to the actual longbowmen themselves. If you can bridge that gap as fast as possible, you will beat the English army. And at Agincourt, this is where they didn't do that, and this was where the first instance of the longbow really coming into play was seen, and really, really hit hard on the French. So Falstaff in the film says we need to have the French, in contrast to military thinking at the time, we need to be downhill from the French mounted knights, which sounds like suicidal, because anybody would think that the horses riding downhill on a dry flat plain would absolutely annihilate the English, and that is true. But what had happened was that the plain was absolutely boggy. It had rained the night before, and it had rained constantly. The earth was soaking. So Falstaff says we need to present a narrow attack line. So they've got dismounted men in the middle, in the centre, taking the majority of the field, effectively being the the target of the French charge, and then on the outskirts of the main body of the army are the English longbow. So by the time the French are smashing downhill, mainly the French, a lot of French nobility as well, they're smashing downhill into the main schiltron of the dismounted knights, English knights, who again majority noble. So there was a lot at stake at this time as well. Nobles fighting one another hand to hand. There's a lot of prisoner taking back in this time, because the higher value prisoner, the more money you were likely to get from the prize of battle as well. Then, so you've got the French charging downhill into the English, and at the time, early on, you can see that the French are getting stuck in the mud, and the horses are bogging them down. The chainmail is bogging them down. The armour is bogging them down. The weapons that they're using is bogging them down. They're not using light-handed weapons, hand-to-hand combat fighting weapons. They're using weapons which are primarily for charge. So you've got your spear, charging spear. You've got your I can't remember what the bloody thing is called, where the knight is charging. I can't remember what it's called now. Sorry, but a lot of it are charging weapons. They are not for hand-to-hand combat fighting, albeit the knights do have a sidearm, but they are not, they are not the primary weapon of choice. So what's happening is that they are getting absolutely jam-packed, smashed together, the French mounted charge downhill, and the Dauphin, sat at the top of the hill, thinks this is going to be a foregone conclusion as he starts to see them getting bogged down, and the longbow is piercing, and it's actually like shooting fish in a barrel. It's just an absolute carnage. The French are bogged down in the field. The English longbow and the Welsh longbow are absolutely decimating the French army. At this time, then, we have the dismounted French knights coming in, and at this point, the French, in order to try and salvage something from this disastrous start of the battle, they try and turn the battle back in their favour by sheer numbers. That is still playing into the hands of the English. So we see in the side forests that Hal and a lot of the light armoured infantry are ready to come in, and they start to turn the battle in their favour. And effectively we see then that the armour bogging the French down is an absolute fucking killing field, and the hand-to-hand fighting is brutal, but the English carry the day. They win one of the most unbelievably astounding battle results in military history, and Henry gives a fantastic speech before the actual start of fighting. The Shakespearean speech, the Band of Brothers speech, is unbelievable as well, and that was, when you hear that, if you watch the film Henry V, or you even watch a Shakespearean production of the Band of Brothers speech, if you listen to that speech, and it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or whoever you are, you would want to run through a fucking wall for somebody, a commander who gives you that speech. And definitely the English their backs were against the wall. They had a better game plan, battlefield plan than the French. The French very, very much took this as a foregone conclusion, and they paid the price for it. And ultimately we see a 1-to-1, the Dauphin, as if to sum up the problem with the entire game plan of the French, tries to take King Henry V on 1-to-1, and can't keep himself stood up. He's slipping everywhere. He's knackered because the chainmail and the armour's weighing him down. He can't even get going to even start the fight. So effectively the French lose at Agincourt, and later on we see Henry marrying Prince Catherine Valois, who's played by Johnny Depp's daughter, Lily Rose Depp. and later on then that he gets effectively what he wants, which is sort of a guarantee that he will be named as the King of France on the event of the death of Charles the Mad, Charles VI. So the Dauphin is not, in reality, was never really, didn't really accept this, and the Dauphin went away and below the Loire River to, sort of consolidate his power base in the Hundred Years' War, and effectively, bit by bit by bit, brick by brick, was able to repatch France together and back under the control of the French royal family. But as in terms of the ending of this film, I thought was very, very good. Was that it's revealed that effectively all the slights and the incidents and the all the sort of the friction between the French and the English had actually been the work of Sir William Gascoigne, the played by Sean Harris, the advisor to King Harry. So, as he said in a bit of his monologue to Prince Harry, that kingdoms cannot be forged by consent; they have to be forged by victory, by war, and this. And in order to consolidate his reign, in order to make sure his kingdom was safe, they had to use the threat of an external enemy. This French war, Agincourt, the invasion of France, leads to the sort of this, not so much the safety, but the consolidation of his power base within England and his throne himself. Henry doesn't like this one bit because of the trust issue. He'd lost his friend Falstaff at Agincourt, who unfortunately fell and died during the melee, the Chiltern smashing together, and it's termed that he suffocated and died. Just the pure body smashing together in Agincourt. There's no room there to breathe, and he's died on the battlefield. So, without anybody he can trust, he kills William Gascoigne. Very, very, very influential person in his administration, and the film wraps up with him saying to his wife Catherine that he wants her to be honest with him, because he wants to be able to trust her going on. He needs to find people he can trust, which leaves off at the end of the film there, and that is that. I mean, Henry himself in real life unfortunately wouldn't go on to live very, very long, and if I would dare say that if Henry V had lived a lot longer with a stronger heir in Henry VI, was a lot more of his father than he turned out to be, then maybe England would never have lost entirely all of their French territories and domains, and if possible probably would have become would have joined the two kingdoms together. But I mean, this is the reason why you still see the fleur-de-lis on the royal crescent, because they still, even now today, they still purport to say that they are the kings of England and France. I mean, even up until the 1700s, many kings and queens of Great Britain would say they were the kings of England, Ireland, and France, even though they had no possessions there, save for maybe Calais, which they eventually lost in the 1580s. But overall, I mean, the film was absolutely amazing. Timothee Chalamet is one of the best up-and-coming actors I've seen, and he was in Dune recently as well, and he was really impressive in that. Carried the film on his own. He's a really gifted actor, in fairness to him. He reminds me of, very similar to how Leonardo DiCaprio came through in the 90s, and was ready for it despite his age. I thought he carried the film exceptionally well. The intensity and the believability of the character was 100%, so that's the best I can give him. I thought the film was very well written as well. It makes you interested and want to go back and read that Shakespearean Henry IV and the Fifth different parts as well. So yeah, I thought overall, I mean, it was a brilliant updated tale for our time without the Shakespearean language to make it more modern for us. So for this film, I think I'm going to give a rating. I didn't even write it down, so I'm going to give a rating of 4.5 out of 5. I really enjoy this movie, and whenever I do see it come back up, if I haven't seen it in a while, I may rewatch it because I do enjoy the direction of the movie, the way it's written, and the performances throughout as well. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy the movie too. Check it out on Netflix as well. Like I say, it's got a superb cast of characters and actors in this as well, and it's on Netflix at the moment too. So yeah, check it out. It is a big budget Netflix movie, 20 million overall, but you can probably tell they've recouped that back in the amount of views that they've seen already on Netflix. Yeah, so yeah, overall 4.5 out of 5. Let me know what you thought of the movie, and if you have any recommendations yourselves, let me know. I'd much appreciate it. But in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind liking the video